real parents, real stories. It's the Meet the Parents podcast.
Good evening and welcome to episode 36 of the Meet the Parents podcast for another 30 odd minutes of parenting based chat from some of your favourite parent bloggers. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham and today I'm going to be talking to Hannah from Budding Smiles. Good evening.
Hello Tim, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. So on this week's podcast we're going to talk about various aspects of travelling with children. Hannah and I are in very different places at the moment when it comes to travelling with kids. Now, my kids are 8, 6 and 4, while Hannah's are 2 and, let me get this right, Martha is 7 months, is that right?
Just coming up, yeah, she'll be 7 months next week.
Consequently, we have very different experiences when it comes to getting out and about, and I was reminded of this when Hannah and baby Martha and I met up at Blogfest a couple of weekends ago. I say reminded because although I've been through the experience of travelling with a baby at 3 different times in the past few years, some of those memories have become selectively erased over time and replaced with more recent and altogether more pleasant memories. So Hannah, you and Phil are heading out for the day with Toby and Martha. What's the essentials that get packed in the car for a journey of any significant distance?
Generally feels like pretty much everything we can get our hands on from inside the house. I think because Toby's at that age now where he needs a bit more entertainment, so he'll say, "Oh, but Mummy, I need to bring my car," or "I need to bring my teddy bear," or everything is very, very essential in Toby's life at the moment. So we have this whole thing where now he's got his little backpack and we'll have to pop stuff into there. Martha, on the other hand, is teething, so she's in the back of the car with a teething toy, and then with the weather going downhill, we've got sort of like a little blanket thing to wrap Martha in that is safe to use in the car seat, and then because Martha's got a blanket, Toby might want a blanket, and if Martha's got a teddy, Toby might want a teddy, and before you know it, you've pretty much got the entire contents of the playroom in the car, and that's before I've even thought about the buggy and the buggy board and the nappies, because they're both still in nappies. So it really does feel like pretty much the entire contents of our house.
So does Toby have one particular toy that he absolutely must bring out with him?
No, actually, he's never been a child with particular attachment. So apart from his dummy, that's the one thing, and that's why we're, as much as obviously I want to get rid of the dummy before he's at school or anything, I'm in no real great rush to get it off of him because that's what he gets his comfort and his attachment from. He's not really got any particular toys. He goes through stages. So at one point it was a Finding Dory bag that he'd got when we went down to London to see a preview of it. Another time it might be a toy tractor or he had an ice scraper for a while last winter. It was an ice scraper. So it really can be anything that piques his interest at that particular moment, really.
It always used to be with our boys that they had to bring a certain combination of cars with them. So it had to be the blue one and the red one and the yellow one, but not the black one. Or it had to be the Volkswagen and the BMW, but not the Audi. There was a very complex permutation of rules that I never quite understood. I think for us, things have naturally got better and easier in most respects as our kids have grown older. We certainly don't have to pack the entire house with us anymore. Although, to be fair, they do bicker a bit more as well. But we put a lot of thought actually into what we bring into the car with us when we were planning our 2-week road trip to France in the summer. So we had plans that included everything from having our own portable Wi-Fi hard drive that allows us to stream films and TV programs to multiple tablets simultaneously, to playing a lot of the old-fashioned games like I Spy and all that kind of stuff. But perhaps the best thing we did was to reconfigure the seating in our car. Now we're quite lucky. We've got a big people carrier as our family car. So instead of having the 3 kids sat across the middle like we normally would, we put Isaac, who would normally sit in the middle of the 3, in the back, and you would not believe how big a difference that made in reducing the number of arguments that occurred. Whenever you plan long trips with kids now, it's completely different, isn't it, to the kind of, how you would plan a trip if it was just you and Phil.
Oh gosh, yeah, completely. It's polar opposites.
Yeah, are there any other ways in which it's different other than having to bring half the playroom with you when you're travelling with the kids? Are there any other big considerations you have to take into account?
I think there's certain things. I mean, I actually wrote a blog post when we were in Lanzarote about the differences between pre-children holidays and family holidays, and really what I noticed was the lack of planning that Phil and I used to put into a lot of things. I mean, we'd kind of say, oh, we're going to go away on this date and we're going to go to this place roughly. We'd book flights and the such, but I mean, we rocked up in Cambodia on I think Boxing Day of 2012 with nowhere to stay, and backpacks on our backs in 40-degree heat, and just wandered around until we found somewhere to stay. And likewise, we would be doing impromptu days out and things like that. So I think that spontaneity is probably the biggest difference, or the lack thereof. Now that we've got children, everything sort of needs to be a little bit more strategically planned at the moment.
Yeah, that's funny. We always used to joke that if we wanted to go away for a weekend or even a week, actually all you needed to pack was a credit card and our passports. Whereas with kids, it is completely different, isn't it? Everything's much more planned out. All the logistics are in place. It's much more regimented. You know exactly what you're doing, when you're doing it, where you're going, and it is. You're absolutely right. It's that lack of spontaneity that characterises a family holiday, isn't it?
Yeah, and even just sort of days or trips out within England or the UK, you need to know, okay, where are the service stations so that we can change their nappies, we can get them some food and things like that. Whereas, we could sort of say, oh, well, okay, we haven't had our lunch, but we've only got an hour left of the journey, so we'll just keep on driving and we'll just get through it. Whereas when you've got the kids, you can't just turn around and say, oh, sorry, just wait another hour before you have your lunch. I'd love to see the response for that. I don't think it would be too positive.
And things do, I can assure you, things do definitely get better, and things have become very different for us over, I guess, the past year or two. I mean, time was when, much as you were saying, we used to pack more stuff for, a family day out or even an afternoon than the two of us used to pack for 2 weeks away. And in the last year or two, it's been incredibly liberating not to have to pack a changing bag or nappies or a buggy or, all that other paraphernalia that you're all too familiar with. And I can remember the first time we travelled as a family of 5 to London, trying to marshal 2 under 5s while wrestling a buggy with a 6-month-old up and down the stairs in tube stations on a busy Saturday afternoon in December. All the other things you have to do. You have to work in snacks and meals and naps. And we had to factor in Toby getting tired after walking his little legs off. And then I wonder why I've wiped most of these memories from my brain.
I know. It's. I seem to be to and fro down to London quite frequently, and I have been taking Martha with me pretty much since she was about, I think, 2 weeks old or something. The first time she came with me, and at first I found it very easy because as long as I had the pushchair and some nappies, it was easy. But now she needs that bit more entertainment, and we're starting with weaning and things like that. I'm actually finding it a lot harder now that she's sort of 6 months old. Like
I say, it does get easier doing these trips into London as they get older, although there was the time just before Christmas last year when we managed to lose Toby in Leicester Square.
Oh no.
And I remember writing something about that at the time. So, it's one of those horrible heart-in-mouth moments that you laugh at afterwards. But, kind of like, I guess, top tips for not losing your child in London the way we did. Definitely, I think, have clearly agreed actions with the kids in the event of you becoming separated. So one of the things that we have drilled into the boys in particular is, knowing exactly what they should do if we get separated on the tube or, out on the street, find a policeman, go into a shop, find someone wearing a uniform, all that kind of stuff. And the one thing that I did take out of it that we do much more of now is making sure that they've got your mobile number written down somewhere, whether it's on a piece of paper. And I know quite a few people put wristbands on their kids with key contact details. And thankfully, bless him, Toby was was great. He kind of stood where he was for about a minute until he realised that no one was coming for him immediately, and then he spotted the police van and just went straight there. So I think he was
Oh, bless him.
he was less worried about it than we were.
I think the innocence of children does probably have a lot to do with the situation, doesn't it? Because they don't necessarily panic the way that we would.
Yeah, and it did really kind of hit home. You know, it's very easy to assume that losing a child is something that only happens to, you know, to other negligent parents, and yet you'd be amazed how easily it happens and how often it happens in a busy place. After that little public service interlude, let's come back to you. I know you were just talking about how, like when you came down to Blogfest, it's just you and Martha, and you're doing these kinds of trips quite a lot. So first of all, just describe what's involved in travelling from home to London for an event such as this.
Generally speaking, if I've got both of the children at home with me, we set off quite early and travel to Peterborough, where my mum and dad live. And basically, I will drop Toby off with my mum whilst I'm in London. What I have done occasionally is stayed overnight at my mum's with the kids the night before, and then Martha and I just sneak off early in the morning. And that's a heck of a lot easier because it avoids trying to battle against the rush hour traffic heading into the city centre. So already, before I've even thought about heading to a train station, we've had at least half an hour in the car, either the night before or in the morning. It's about either 50 minutes to an hour and a quarter on the train, depending on whether I get the fast or the slow train. That takes me into King's Cross, so that's quite easy, really. It's handy to get the tube to anywhere, really. The difficulty then comes if the place that I'm going to is either near a tube station that hasn't got lifts or is several jumps across different lines to get there. So quite often I have just been known to rock up at King's Cross and go, oh my goodness, I cannot be bothered with this, and just jump into a black cab because it's just so much easier sometimes than dealing with the tube, with a pushchair, with a 6-month-old. Although I do have to say, in all my times going to and from London, both pregnant and with the children, I am yet to have a really, truly bad experience as far as other people are concerned. You do hear a lot of negativity about how people are really rude and really unhelpful, but that, thankfully, is not something that I've come across. I've always found people to be really, really helpful with getting the pushchair on and off of trains or helping me up and down steps in the event that I'm at a station without lifts. And so that has helped me to keep doing it and to keep going on my travels, because I can be fairly sure that somebody will help me, even if I have to stand there looking woeful at the bottom of a flight of stairs for a little while.
Yeah, and we always found that as well when we were travelling with one of the kids in the buggy into London, where there's always someone who will help you at the bottom of the stairs carry the buggy up them, and it's surprising the generosity that you do still get from people even in a busy city like London. Now, when you're travelling by car, that's one thing. You can, as you say, chuck half the playroom in the back of the car. Now, when you're travelling by train, you're travelling much lighter, aren't you? So what are the real key essentials that you'll take with you when you're travelling with Martha on the train for to London?
I pretty much have a giant changing bag, but it has to be able to clip onto the pushchair so I don't have to lug it around everywhere. And it really is just tons of nappies, tons of wipes, a teething ring for her, my purse, my phone, a notepad and a pen. And as long as I've got those things, I can pretty much get by, really. And then the obligatory mocha as I'm getting, that I get at the train station, because I can't possibly walk onto a train without a coffee in hand.
Yeah, no, I'm like that as well in the morning, because I'm so not a morning person. So whenever I'm travelling, there are times I wish I could just inject caffeine intravenously.
It would be useful.
Now, when you brought Martha to Blogfest, I guess that was probably just about as open and welcoming an environment as you could ever bring a baby to. I mean, after all, you're surrounded by fellow mums who will be sympathetic to the odd spot of crying or feeding, and there's even the odd dad around who will happily allow Martha to use his fingers as a teething aid, or possibly lunch.
Well, that was very lucky.
But not all venues are as welcoming when you're out and about with the kids. I know recently we had one high-profile instance that was flagged up in the media of a cafe in Glossop, I think it was, that requested via its Facebook page that parents should take a child with a tantrum outside in order that other customers could enjoy their coffee in peace. And this kind of incident isn't really that isolated. We're seeing airlines now starting to introduce child-free zones on planes, and we even had Janet Street Porter writing in the Daily Mail last year saying that she wanted to ban children from cafes and restaurants. Needless to say, she doesn't have any children of her own. I mean, here's a quote from that particular article. Badly behaved children in restaurants and cafes are in my top 5 hates, along with men in shiny white shoes, women who lie about their cosmetic surgery, people who like drinks with cherries in them, and rude van drivers. Now, I'm with her when it comes to van drivers and drinks with cherries in them, but if that's her list of top 5 hates, then she really does need to find bigger things to hate, like, I don't know, people who don't know when they should and shouldn't put an apostrophe in the word it's, or the Chris Evans version of Top Gear. But interestingly, whenever I see these kinds of pieces, I guess like most issues that get discussed by clickbait websites like The Mail, opinion is really strongly divided. But what do we think? Is there any case for excluding parents who have noisy or upset children in coffee shops or cafes?
I think that if you are welcoming children and families into your restaurant or cafe, then you can't expect that the parent is then just going to be able to gather up all their belongings and march out of said cafe or restaurant as soon as their toddler has a temper tantrum. I mean, goodness knows that my 2-year-old can have a meltdown that ends all meltdowns. I mean, he throws some spectacular tantrums. If I'm out in a coffee shop on my own with Toby and Martha, and Toby has a temper tantrum over the wrong type of smoothie or anything like that, the last thing that I'm going to be able to do is leave him tantruming whilst I get Martha into the pushchair, pack everything up, then hook him under one arm whilst I'm pushing the pushchair with the other arm. It won't happen. So I think I personally, as a mum, as a parent, and also as someone who enjoys going into coffee shops for a bit of R&R, I haven't got a problem with some cafes and restaurants saying no under 16s, for example. But I don't think that they can say that children and families are allowed in and then expect you to just pack everything up and walk out if your child is having a temper tantrum, because it's a logistical nightmare at best. So the last thing I would want is to feel that the manager's going to come up to me and basically read me the riot act and tell me to get on out. I just don't think it's fair, is there? I think if they don't want the risk of children being noisy or having temper tantrums, then simply say no under 16s. I don't have an issue with that, as long as it's not every coffee shop, because otherwise I will have some problems.
I mean, the other thing that I thought about that story was what the shop did of essentially calling out one particular parent on their Facebook page was, that was bang out of order, I thought. I mean, yeah. if you've got a problem with a parent with a noisy child, go over, offer help, have a quiet word, whatever, but just don't bitch about it on social media. And and the other thing that occurs to me is, where do you draw the line with these things? Do you ask a parent with a struggling child to take it outside? What about the person who thinks that the entire shop needs to hear their end of a mobile phone conversation? What do you say to them? And if you're going to have child-free zones on the plane, can we have drunk-free zones as well? That would be quite nice.
It would. When we were on the plane to Lanzarote, there was a group that were clearly on some sort of mate's holiday, and one of them was very, very drunk, very, very loud, swearing in front of my young impressionable 2-year-old. And I just thought, well, actually, she's the bigger problem on this plane, not my son, who was sat there quite merrily watching games and TV shows on the iPad. So you're absolutely right. Where do you draw the line? Because it's not always the children that are the problem.
Yeah, and when you do take Toby and Martha out in public, I mean, are you, as a parent, I guess you're quite conscious as well, aren't you, of trying not to disturb other people? I mean, sometimes you can't help it, but most parents aren't the type who are just going to let their kids run around and make lots of noise and disturb other people.
No, exactly. I mean, I tend to try and be fairly selective about where we go. So I know that Toby's at the age where he is starting to be able to sit and enjoy having a bite to eat or having his baby tuna or whatever. But go back a couple of months and he had no interest in sitting at the table whatsoever. So the last thing I would do is go to sort of some high-end cafe or anywhere where there wasn't much space. You know, I need to be able to walk around with him a little bit whilst we're waiting for our food to arrive, for example, and go to places where I know that children are welcome. So I think it's, you know, there's an element of responsibility on the parents not to take their children to somewhere that's not appropriate for children. And then there's the element of other patrons of the shop or cafe, restaurant, whatever, accepting the fact that kids will be kids and they don't sit there perfectly quiet with a smile on their face, you know, for several hours at a time. They are going to want to wander around, and sometimes, heaven forbid, a baby's going to cry when they need a feed, or a toddler's going to want to wander off and look at the pretty picture on the wall. And, you know, I think there has to be an element of give and take, really.
It's also an important part of teaching kids their own social skills, isn't it? I think, you know, we always made a point of taking the kids out to, you know, to Costa's or to, you know, to McDonald's or whatever when they were younger. And, you know, at first they were quite fidgety in public places and they'd become quite restless. You do things to distract them, don't you? We always packed lots of crayons and magazines and toys and all that kind of other stuff. So we always had options, and they were still quite a handful at times. But ultimately, I think it's reaped benefits because they're very much at home in restaurants and coffee shops, and actually they're really well behaved, and you know they understand how the whole process of ordering food in a restaurant works, and that you have to wait and so on, and they quite enjoy the people watching now. And of course, you know, now that they're older, they're big enough to divert themselves by having their own conversations, whether it's with us or with each other. At the moment, that usually means them talking endlessly about Strictly, but there you go. Finally, we touched on this a little bit just now, but what about flying? What experiences have you had travelling by plane with the kids?
I've done it 3 times now. Once with Toby when he was about 7 months old, twice with the both of them. When Toby was a baby, we went to Tenerife, to celebrate my dad's 60th. So this was February of last year. It was great because we had not just Phil and I, but also my parents, my brother, and some family friends. So we could merrily pass him along to whoever was willing to hold him, because he was pretty unsettled for quite a lot of it. He wasn't very happy about the whole situation. Then this year we took them to Lanzarote, and that was just Phil and I. That was actually very, very successful, I have to say. Phil had got some TV shows and games and things like that on his laptop. We had packed books, and it was good because although I mostly had Martha, we were sat sort of one behind the other. I predominantly had Martha because she was needing feeding quite a lot. She was 4.5, 5 months old at that point. And Phil was in front of me with Toby, but then sometimes I'd pass Martha over the seat. Toby discovered that he could crawl underneath his seat and get to me, so he found that highly amusing. But actually, I think because we'd sort of almost a case of prepare for the worst, and it was a really successful flight overall. And then again, only about a week after we got home from Tenerife, my mum and I then headed over to Spain with the both of them. And again, I think because both of us were there and we could swap the children, it was easier for them not to get too bored. You know, we had games and we had toys and we had books, and I think both of them fell asleep on all the flights at some point or another. So I think it was just a case of being prepared that it could be tricky, and putting sort of strategies in place, right? What is going to be most successful in keeping them calm? In Martha's case, it's generally breastfeeding, and in Toby's case, it's Peppa Pig, books, and apparently climbing under seats of aeroplanes. So it worked quite well.
We've had a fair few experiences now travelling by plane with the kids. And Isaac travelled with us to Malaysia and Australia when he was 3 months old, which actually with hindsight was a fantastic time to travel. I mean, other than having to change nappies, and thank God we had no explosive poo up the back incidents, it was it was actually dead easy. relatively speaking. You know, he slept for most of the time. He wasn't big enough to want to run around or crawl underneath seats, and we didn't have to pay for a seat. Cara also travelled to Australia with Heather before she was a year old. That wasn't such an easy experience, partly because Heather was on her own, and also because being several months older, she was much more of a handful and slept much less. I mean, for sure, travelling with a 9-month-old is very different to doing it with a 3-month-old. But yes, shorter haul, we've been to Europe with all 3 kids the past 4 summers, I think it is, flying all but the last one. So while, any trip to an airport is, of course, really exciting for any kid, they're all pretty experienced travellers now as well, and they're just not fazed by the whole process, which is kind of nice. So I guess before we close, any top tips from you regarding travelling with kids, or conversely, any experiences you'd rather forget?
I'd definitely rather forget the return journey from Tenerife back to the UK, where Toby was asleep in the sling, and the security guard at Tenerife Airport, as we were going back through the scanners, demanded that we had to take Toby out of said sling in order to be able to go through the scanner, and that resulted in him waking up after only 10 minutes of his nap and promptly screaming pretty much all the way through the airport, onto the plane, and for the 4.5-hour flight until we got back to the UK. So my one top tip would be that slings are fantastic. They are, baby wearing is just such a wonderful way to get around, and it makes things a lot easier in a lot of ways. But just beware that when you go through security, you may well be asked to take the child out. I mean, same with pushchairs. You generally have to take the child out of the pushchair, fold the pushchair up, and put it through the scanner. So although there's the convenience of being able to take the pushchair up to the plane, there is also the inconvenience. And I think if you're travelling on your own, I don't quite know how you'd manage it. I mean, I have been known to pass my children on to random strangers in order for me to get the pushchair folded up when I've been on various trips. So I think it's those little things that you just don't think of. You think, oh, fantastic, I can take my pushchair and I can go right up to the steps of the plane. But then you've also got to consider collapsing it and getting it ready to go on the plane or through security.
Different airports treat buggies in different ways, don't they? So a lot of them will allow you to take the buggy right up to the plane, won't they? And then they'll stick it in baggage, and then you can't reclaim it at the other end until baggage reclaim, which means carrying your small child all the way through the airport and all the other rigmarole that goes with that. Which the first time that happened to us, that was a bit of a shock.
Well, when we came back from Spain, I think it was, we flew back into Luton Airport, and I had the other end of it where my pushchair was taken off of the aeroplane and unceremoniously dumped in a heap by the wing, only it was pouring with rain, absolutely torrential rain. So by the time I was able to throw Martha at my mum and get her inside with the kids, thankfully another family were helping us with the bags, because otherwise it would have been nigh on impossible. By the time I managed to get the pushchair up and put the waterproofs over it to get Martha in, it was absolutely drenched. So there's all these sorts of things that you just cannot plan for.
I guess my top tips would probably be some of the fairly obvious ones. So, as you were saying earlier, get your logistics sorted, be as prepared as possible, be ready for the worst. Definitely allow plenty of time for the inevitable toilet stops, and I do mean toilet stops plural. Try to explain to the kids what to do beforehand so it doesn't become a huge, overwhelming surprise. There aren't many places that they'll ever go that are as large, busy and complex as a major airport. Oh, and that reminds me, consider flying from smaller regional airports, which is something we've done a couple of times as well. Facilities are nowhere near as good, but it is so much less stressful, less busy, everything's much closer, and you can be in and out at either end so much faster than you can at, say, Heathrow or Gatwick. And I guess the final tip, and this was a huge lesson for us, is to be conscious of the pitfalls of flying and driving, hiring a car. So in the past we've done that, and we've flown with 1 or 2 of the kids' car seats with us to avoid getting stung by the exorbitant cost of child seats from car hire firms. And it's undeniably cheaper doing it that way, but it also means having to first carry and then check in the seat separately. They generally have to go to an oversized baggage check-in, which is inevitably at the far end of the terminal to wherever you've checked in. And then you have to collect them at the other end, same problem, and cart them with all your other luggage to a car hire place, which at some airports requires a fair old walk or a bus ride. So it could be, when you've got tired screaming kids around you, it can be a real faff, especially if you're flying somewhere hot. And yeah, ultimately, how much are you saving? It's often a relatively small amount. And actually what we've ended up doing is buying some of those semi-inflatable travel booster seats for as soon as the boys were legally able to use them. And these basically just roll up and they can be packed in your suitcase. They're not the most comfortable things ever to sit on, but for a week in a hire car, they're absolutely fine. And better still, now that we're starting to take our own car on trips, the kids can just travel in their usual seats and there's no extra fuss at all. So there you have it, the Meet the Parents Guide to Travelling with Kids. At first it may seem like it's easier and less stressful to move house than to pop into town for a coffee, but it does get better and easier eventually. Although by the time that happens, you may not actually want to travel with your kids anymore. Before we go, what have you been up to over the past couple of weeks, Hannah?
Not all that much, to be honest, apart from drinking as much coffee as I can get my hands on, because we've all been struck down with various colds and coughs, sickness bugs and everything else over the last couple of weeks. So I feel like I have coughed a lot, not slept, and drinking coffee to sort of get me through the day. But we've had some nice times as a family, going out for walks and things, and I visited some relatives over the weekend whilst Phil was out with a friend. So it's not all doom and gloom, but certainly coffee has helped. So I'm very glad that I haven't been kicked out of any coffee shop.
It is that time of year, isn't it, when it suddenly turns cold and everyone is constantly coughing and sniffling. We've been much the same here. As for us, I touched on my less than positive Blogfest experience in last week's podcast, but this week's actually been quite quiet for me overall. We had a trip into London at the weekend to take my dad out for lunch to celebrate his birthday. Thankfully, the kids were well behaved and we didn't have to be asked to leave. But otherwise, that's been about it, other than a looming sense that Christmas is now just around the corner already. How the hell did it get to be the back end of November already? So that's it for another episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. I'm away next week, so we will be back in 2 weeks' time. But in the meantime, here's where you can find Hannah and I online.
I'm at Budding Smiles on social media, and my blog is buddingsmiles.co.uk.
And I'm at Thatcham Dad, and you can find me on my blog at slouchingtowardsthatcham.com. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and Android devices, on our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. Do give us a follow on Twitter at Parents Podcast, and also Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. So thanks very much for listening tonight, and do please join us again in 2 weeks' time. Good night.